Hi, everybody. It's meteorologist Joe Chaffee. Let's go through the morning runs of the NAM and the GFS. We don't have the European yet because it won't be out for another hour. And I think that's going to at least give us, I think, a better determination of how this next weather system is going to play out. Now, first off, we have today, which is really looking nice. And you can see there's a ridge here in the eastern states. And here's the next weather system for later tomorrow into early Wednesday that brings a cold front through. Now, here's where we've been talking about yesterday. There's your trough, and here's the southern part of the trough, and you can just start to see hints here of a strong disturbance in northwest Canada coming into the scene. And the trough splits, that northern piece goes by, so that brings a cold front through here and puts us back into some marginally colder air, not like the cold air we had going into the blizzard. But there's your upper air disturbance in the northern stream. This is the one in the southern stream. And as we move along, you can see where we get to at the end of the period, which is Thursday evening. Now, this is the NAM here, and you can see the two streams are trying to face right to our west. So this makes the forecast very difficult again, because there's going to be a western edge to the precip. And with regards to the NAM, we're going to pay attention to this because of what it just did. It doesn't mean it's going to be be correct, and it doesn't mean that it will be the best model this time around. I happen to think it may not be, at least at this point, because we're dealing with northern stream energy here as well as southern stream energy, and that the southern stream, the NAM may be a little bit better with. I don't know, maybe that's why it handled last week's storm so well. But that's for researchers to figure out. And you can see here on this run of the NAM that it has the back edge of precip to the coast. Now, in a situation like this, when you have marginally cold air, if you have dynamics, you can, what I would call do-it-yourself cold air, where the atmosphere, once precipitation gets underway, it dynamically cools from the top of the atmosphere down, and you wind up with a narrow band of snow on the northwestern side. But that's very tricky to forecast, and that's a short-range problem. I think the takeaway here is the fact that the surface low is pretty far to the left. So we have to be a little bit cautious. Now, the GFS, which I'm not surprised it did this, and there's a notable difference in the GFS. The GFS is much further out. So if you see how the surface is showing with this low over Lake Huron, and you have the low just offshore, and there's some cold air kind of trying to sort of wedge in there a little bit, but there is, cold air certainly aloft. And when we go to the upper air on the GFS, you'll see the difference at 84 hours. I'm going to go back it up a little bit. The GFS does the phase. You see how it phases there at 84 hours. Right there, it's trying to phase. You can still pick out the separate entities of this, and then it really phases here by 1 a.m. But by this time, the surface low is way out here, so it has to happen a little bit further to the west, and you have to have that phase go on, and then of course it just moves along to the east. So I'm not really surprised by the runs today. The NAM, I figured would come a little left, and it did. The GFS, I kind of thought would maybe come a shade left. I don't know if it did enough to make a difference. The bottom line is for Thursday night and Friday is that this and this have to phase far enough west in order for something to happen here on the coast. Now let's just look. I want to look at the long range just to give you an idea, because we are in an incredibly volatile pattern with all these extremes going on. So we might as well just keep it going. And there's your phase here by the end of the week. Now, once that lifts out, our flow is now coming west to east. So Canada's temporarily cut off. So we're going to warm up some. And then the next trough comes into the western states. So that's going to pump up the ridge here in the east to some degree. So look for the first part of next week to be rather warm, as we'll probably have some kind of deep storm go to the Great Lakes. And you'll notice across the Arctic here that pressures are high. In fact, they're very high north to the northeast of Alaska. Is a big upper high that's building there. So that's going to be interesting to see how that winds up playing out. But then as we move through next week, and gradually we start to get troughing back in the eastern states, and you establish this northwest flow out of Canada, and more cold air will start coming in as we move through the first 10 days or so of February. And you can see on the longest range that you still have this Canadian flow intact. Pretty dynamic look, pretty volatile look all the way around. So a lot to think about here in the short term. We will, of course, keep you on top of things. When the European comes out this afternoon, at some point I'll put something up regarding it. Right now, if anything's going to happen, I would think the threat would be for coastal areas and much less so inland areas for Thursday night and Friday. And I don't think this is anything at this point to get too overly worked up about, because the idea of having two major storms within 5 days of each other is a pretty rare event. I was trying to rack my brain to remember the last time something like that happened, so I can't seem to remember something like that happening. So, the odds are pretty long for a second storm. But on the other hand, given the fact that we've already experienced several events, including the last two, that have decidedly backed northwestward at the last minute, I think we need to be cautious here, as it is only Monday, and there's plenty of time for models to adjust in either direction. So we'll let you know when the European comes out what it does, and we'll try and figure this out as we go through the next couple of days.